He paid for a bride, not for beauty, not for obedience, but for the quiet hope that somewhere, someone might choose to stay. Callum Hart sealed the letter with hands worn from winters and wars, not asking for love, only for silence, strength, and a woman who wouldn't flinch at the weight of a man still haunted. What he received, however, wasn't silence. It was Elena. And she didn't come to fill the empty corners of his house. She came to teach it how to breathe again. Ash Hollow, Nebraska. Late winter. The wind slipped over the wooden roof like some old beast, thin, ragged, rubbing itself against what once stood strong. Callum Hart sat alone at the table, thick wool sweater dusted in ash, and his left hand still numb from the morning's sharp cold. Outside, the snow no longer held its whiteness. It had turned a dirty gray, crusted and cracked under horseshoes, much like the scar on his jawline, a faint fracture left by a war long past. The fire in the cast-iron stove wheezed. He tossed in more dry kindling. The wood popped in protest, its soft snaps sounding like a small voice that used to be near. But there was no one here. Hadn't been for years. A sheet of paper lay on the table, old cream-colored stock, thick like legal parchment, its corners curled from being flipped back and forth in the wind. He hadn't opened it. No reason to rush. Callum had never rushed toward anything involving people, not since Edith died. She'd taken the rest of him when she passed that winter, along with the child that hadn't yet formed. The war had taken his brother's arm. Death had taken the laughter from the house. And time? Time left nothing but dust and the wind repeating itself. Callum sat there, his fingertip tracing the envelope's edge like it marked the final border between choice and fate. Then he opened it. Just one line. Bridal arrangement agency confirms the match. Estimated arrival, 3rd week of April. No name, no description, no well-wishing pleasantries. He folded the letter, laid it beside the chipped ceramic mug, cracked right where lips once met rim. He wasn't looking for someone to love. Didn't need a nod at night or a question in the morning. Callum just wanted someone who wouldn't leave when the ground sank underfoot, when dinner lacked salt, when winter overstayed the almanac by 3 damn weeks. Someone who wasn't startled by silence. Someone who'd stay when snow blocked the door and no one came past the porch. The house sat at the north edge of Ash Hollow, where land dipped gently toward a dry gulch that'd fill with muddy runoff come spring. The roof looked like a coarse wool hat pulled over the head of a man done dreaming. The timber walls bent under the weight of old snow. The ground hadn't yet agreed to breathe. Callum fixed the window hinge in quiet, more as if readying the room for wind than for a woman. He patched the corner of the sleeping mat, sewing the padding with black thread. It wasn't out of courtesy for whoever was coming. It was because he couldn't abide something torn for too long. The days passed like the tick of a pocket watch stuck in an old coat. Callum didn't count down. He let mornings line up behind each other like firewood split even, short, steady, offering no argument to the axe. One night, when the sky held so still you could hear snow sliding off the roof, he sat alone by the fire, pouring whiskey from the bottle he'd kept since his last friend's funeral. Light didn't soothe. It revealed the patches on the walls left unpainted, a hairline crack down the doorframe, nameless shadows creeping up where no one stood. He used to believe in this house, built it with his own hands, placed the first stone in the kitchen corner because Edith once said the wind wouldn't bite from that side. But then a cough became a fever, became 3 days of labored breath, and the room turned into a crypt. He buried her past the fence, just left of the lavender bush now withered from frost. Since then, the house had stopped being a home. It was just a place to sleep without dreaming. Ordering a bride hadn't come from hope. It came from a hollow that couldn't be filled with timber, kindling, or prayer. Callum didn't expect beauty. Didn't care for candlelit dinners. He just wanted someone who could see the man he was. Scarred, blunt, bone-weary of belief, and choose to stay. Not out of need, but because they too had spaces within them that bore no name, and they decided to share the silence that filled them. The letter stayed in a tin box beside the few silver coins he'd sent away. Callum closed the lid and slid it into the cupboard beneath the kitchen shelf. Not out of shame, just because some stories don't need retelling. He stood, drew the coarse curtain shut with a pull. Outside, the wind began to shift. An owl called from across the pine line. No one answered, but Callum heard, and he knew. The season would change. Someone was coming. And for the first time in years, he didn't turn his back on the thought of it. Elena Vale stepped down from the dust-covered stagecoach, her boots tapping lightly against the wooden plank like a greeting that didn't need saying. She wore an earth-colored coat, so worn it had long forgotten what color it once claimed to be. Her hair was knotted low at the nape with a faded strip of cloth. No ribbon. No belt. No trace of someone who'd ever been pinned to a particular kind of pretty. Callum Hart stood under the overhang of the stage stop, a place no bigger than a mule shed, with his hat pulled low and hands buried in his thick coat. He hadn't known what to expect, but when he saw Elena, saw the way she didn't look around like someone lost, he knew this wasn't the kind of woman who spooked at snow or owls in the dark. She looked him in the eye. Not probing, not soft, but not cold either. Just lived. "Callum Hart," he said. "Elena Vale." No one reached out a hand. None needed to. He nodded toward the small wagon behind him. "Let's go." She gave one single nod, climbed in, sat straight. Didn't ask how far. Didn't ask what waited down the road. Callum took his place beside her, gripped the reins. The horse snorted, breath white in the air. They left the station behind. The ride back to Ash Hollow wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. Not when silence rode the whole stretch. The wagon wheels cut through thawing mud, leaving deep ruts like the clumsy scrawls of a child learning their letters. Every jolt rocked Elena slightly, but she didn't brace, didn't shift, as if she were part of the wagon itself, or had long been used to movements she couldn't command. Wind tore past the brim of her bonnet, pulling loose strands of hair from the knot. She didn't fix them. Callum stole one glance. She was still looking forward, not at the road, but at something farther, like her gaze had moved beyond land that required steady footing to cross. She didn't ask how long he'd lived out there. Didn't ask why. Didn't ask what might drive a man to buy a bride instead of believe in fate, like folks always like to say. He didn't offer answers either, not from pride, just because silence between them didn't feel like something that needed filling. Above them, the sky stretched wide and pale ash gray. No clouds, no blue. Just a blank expanse, like a page waiting for someone brave enough to write. Ash Hollow came into view as the wagon crested the low hill. The house sat quiet, like a seashell left behind by tide. The ground hadn't cracked open, but it hadn't come back to life either. The wooden fence leaned in the wind. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin as the last breath of day. "We're here," Callum said. Elena looked, didn't nod, didn't speak, But her gaze didn't drift. She stepped down, her boot pressing into gray mud like sealing a choice. Not forced, but permitted. A choice to stand someplace, not just to flee from elsewhere. She looked at the fence, the slanted roof, the bare peach tree by the porch. "Not bad," she said. Callum didn't answer. She stepped up the stoop, opened the door without waiting for instruction. No pause, no caution. She didn't smile at what she saw inside, but she didn't flinch either. She just looked. The cabin was one open room. A square table with 2 chairs, a stone stove, shelves lined with a few cups, a knife, a coil of rope. A rifle and axe rested against the wall. In one corner, the main bed. Opposite, a smaller bed made from an old shelving frame. Thin mattress, folded blanket, no pattern. Elena walked straight to the window, touched the wood sill, ran her fingers across the edge of the kitchen counter. "Where's the flour?" she asked. "Right side cupboard, second drawer." She nodded, rolled up her sleeves, said nothing more. Callum stood by the stove, watching the fire shrink back as if making room. A while later, the scent of cornbread drifted out, neither sweet nor spiced, just warm enough to remind a person they were alive. They ate in silence, wooden spoons tapping bowls, ladles stirring slow in the iron pot. She didn't ask if he liked it. He didn't say it was good, but both of them ate every bite. When Callum rose to check the door, she washed the dishes, quiet, efficient, like someone used to doing things without expecting praise. He stepped outside for a spell. When he returned, she was drying her hands on a cloth, eyes watching the window as if night was something to listen to, not fear. "You build this house yourself?" she asked. "After the war. Took 3 seasons." She nodded. Didn't ask which war. No need. Everybody had something they'd left behind. "Still standing," she said. Callum looked at her. And for the first time since they met, he wasn't just seeing someone who stayed. He saw someone weighing whether she might choose to. When night came, she walked toward the small bed. "I'll take the spare, if that's all right." "There's room on the big bed." "I know, but I'm fine here." No challenge, no fear, no testing, just a statement of what she'd chosen. She pulled the blanket over herself, turned onto her side, and closed her eyes like someone who'd lived long under dim lamps and still found sleep there. Callum lingered, tossed more wood into the stove, turned down the oil lamp. "As you like," he said softly. Not an order, not a surrender, just quiet acceptance. The night sealed shut outside the window. The wind shifted, and in a wooden house tucked deep into untamed land, 2 people breathed quiet. Not for each other, but beside each other. The first days passed, like water sinking into dry earth, without noise, without warning, quietly becoming something that might one day nourish. Elena didn't ask where the bed was placed, didn't check the corners of the room, didn't rummage through drawers looking for something to call her own. She moved through the doorway as if she'd lived there once before, as if the house didn't need to be introduced to her, only needed to remember how to breathe again. On the first morning, when Callum stepped out with his old neck scarf, coffee was already waiting. Black, no sugar, no questions, no explanation. The stove had been wiped down, the firewood restacked with care. A handkerchief hung out on the porch rail, pinned with a dried pine twig. No one had taught Elena how to live in this house, but something in the way she arranged each cup, each lid on a pot, made it clear she wasn't merely passing through. She didn't need instructions. She watched and followed the breath of the house. Callum began to notice things he'd thought were permanent, like how his leather gloves were no longer damp each morning from dew. They'd been hung above the stove, close to just enough heat. Or how the tablecloth, which had been folded crooked since last season, now lay square, creased like a shirt someone once folded for someone they loved. He never saw Elena sit idly, but he never saw her rush either. Everything she did felt measured, clean, solid, without wasted sound. One afternoon, as clouds pressed low, he saw her sitting on the porch step, holding an empty basket, eyes following the drift of heavy sky like she was reading it. Not dreamy, not lost, just present. Elena never told stories about herself, but every task she performed was a piece of one. She knew how to peel onions with the dull side of a knife to keep the sting away, knew how to bind the handle of a sloshing water pail with folded jute so it wouldn't give, knew how to lift a cast-iron pot without letting it ring. Her hands bore thin cracks. The skin of her palms was thick, not from sewing or books, but from years of carrying, gripping, holding, and never quite letting go. Once Callum saw her mend the seam on her heavy coat, not because it had torn, but because the thread had loosened. He didn't say a word, but that night, as he folded the coat, his fingers passed over the stitched line and paused there, quiet. One evening, wind came down early from the woods. The window rattled hard in its frame. The house seemed to shrink, like everything that had once sheltered now braced itself to endure. They didn't speak over supper, but Callum heated extra water, and Elena brewed 2 cups of tea with leaves he hadn't seen her use before. Bitter with a faint sourness, but warm enough to steady the hands. As the fire dimmed, she sat watching the coals, breath uneven, not from fatigue, but like something was strumming tight inside her chest. "I don't need saving." She said it like someone catching their reflection in a window they hadn't looked into for a long time. No tremble, no resentment, just truth, finally aired. Callum sat across from her, tea still in hand. His eyes didn't blink. Wind whispered through the doorframe, like a memory brushing past. After a moment, he answered, quiet, like dropping a pebble into cold creek water. "I wouldn't know how." That sentence stayed between them. No one corrected it. No one denied it. Only silence remained, the kind they both understood. Not the silence people use to hide, but the kind that lets you listen. She rose then, hand grazing the back of the chair. Didn't turn in. But she didn't wait for more words either. Her shadow stretched long across the wood wall, straight, unbending, leaning toward no one. The house, too, began to relearn the art of waiting, not the kind meant for farewells, but the kind that opens slowly, like a winter-bound window cracking just enough to let light in. Callum knew this when, one morning, he found his scarf, washed, dried, folded neat, resting on the porch step. Beside it lay a sprig of dried lavender. Where she'd found it, he couldn't say. But the scent was unmistakable. It was what he once planted with Edith, what hadn't been tended since. And maybe, for the first time in years, it had survived the winter. Night fell faster than usual, as if the sky itself were in a hurry to slip into sleep and forget what it had been. The house was bolted tight. The fire had sunk low, its amber glow crawling across the wooden floor before dimming into a deep, honeyed hue. Callum slept on the larger bed, his back turned to the small room, not out of need for space, but from habit. He was used to leaving room for things left unsaid. From the cot in the corner came a sound, thin, uncertain, not clear, not desperate, like someone trying to cry without being caught doing it. It didn't last. It wasn't dramatic, just a small fracture in a wall long held shut from the inside. Callum didn't rise. He didn't knock on her door. He didn't speak her name. He simply pressed a hand to his knee, stood quietly, and placed 2 more logs in the stove. Adjusted the iron grate to help the flame catch even. The fire grew. Not hotter, not louder, just enough that the corners weren't completely devoured by dark. He sat, back against the wall, letting the pine resin crackle into the silence, and waited for the sound to fade. The next morning, Elena rose early, just as she always did. There was no trace of a restless night. She cooked cornmeal porridge, salted it, laid out the dishes. Her hands didn't shake. Callum said nothing. Neither did she. But as she placed the spoon into his bowl, her fingers touched the rim, not to test the heat, but perhaps to say she knew, and that he knew too. Outside, the night frost melted slow. The earth was damp, like a letter never sent but already soaked with intention. After breakfast, Elena pulled on her coat, laced her boots, and walked toward the edge of the woods, where the stream curved softly behind the willows. Watched, then followed. Not fast, not close, just near enough for someone not yet ready to speak, but not wanting to walk alone either. The stream wasn't wide. Barely to the ankles, its current moved steady, not still, not rushing. Elena stood in the water, boots left on the bank, skirt tucked up clean. The water circled her ankles, cold like the first brush against old memory. She didn't turn, but she knew Callum was there. "I used to do this as a girl," she said, "when there was something I didn't understand, couldn't hold. I'd go to the river, stand in the current, and try to believe that if I stayed long enough, the water would carry it away." Callum didn't ask what she hadn't been able to carry. He knew some things weren't meant to be unfolded. She watched the stream for a long while, as if reading something written across its surface. "Water doesn't stop for anyone," she said. "Not for the kind, not for the cruel, not for grief, not for joy. I stood in it once, hoping it would wash away the fear. But fear doesn't float. It steps back, waits for another day." Callum didn't answer right away. He picked up a small stone beneath his boot, tossed it gently toward the deeper end. It made a soft splash, gone almost before it registered. "Maybe it doesn't carry the fear," he said, "but maybe it lets you know you can still stand in it." Elena turned to him. Her gaze wasn't wet, wasn't moved, but for the first time there was no wall. "I'm not afraid of water," she said. "I'm afraid of standing still, of not getting out, of staying too long in a house where the only sound is footsteps on floorboards." Callum looked at her bare feet in the stream. Cold, but steady. She was holding her own weight. "There's no knock before the past comes back," she said. "I know," he replied. They stood there, not face to face, but side by side, not offering comfort, but not walking away either. When she stepped out of the water, mud clung to her feet, and bits of grass stuck to her skin. She didn't shake them off, didn't clean them. She simply passed by him, walking toward the house she hadn't yet called home, but had begun to know by the feel of the door handle. Callum followed, not to guard, just to go with her. That night, while she hung her wet socks over the wire behind the stove, Callum placed a cup of tea near her chair. He said nothing. Elena looked at the cup, smiled, just barely, not joy, but a kind of smile that loosened a face that had been held tight for too long. A breath escaped her chest, like something pulled free. A pin removed no one had noticed had been stuck beneath the skin. She picked up the tea, cradled it in both hands. "No one ever waited for me to stand on my own," she said. "They either pulled me up or walked away." Callum didn't meet her eyes. He just placed another log into the stove. "I'm no good at saving people," he said, "but I know fire needs time to settle into itself." She didn't answer, but she stayed. The firelight flickered across the wall. There were two shadows now. One still learning how to stay still. One still learning how not to run. And the house was no longer just a shell. It had begun to breathe in rhythm, with two people learning to live slow, but real. October wind slipped through the trees, not howling, not screaming, just threading through like someone whispering your old name in a dream. Elena was splitting wood near the porch when the sound of hooves reached her. Not hurried, but loud enough to carry farther than it needed to. Callum stepped out from behind the chicken coop. He heard it the same moment she did. They shared a brief glance, then both turned their eyes down the red dirt slope. A man on horseback was climbing the rise. He wore an old soldier's coat, sunlight casting sharp shadows across the rifle slung over his back. He rode tall, like the horse was nothing but ground under his will. No gentling, no fatigue considered. As he neared, Elena said nothing. But Callum heard her breath catch, cut short in the chest like someone realizing they hadn't put enough distance between now and then. The man dismounted slowly. His gaze brushed over Callum, then locked tight on Elena. The smile he gave never reached his eyes. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "Name's Elena Vale." Callum stepped forward, just one pace, not aggressive, but enough that no one could pretend not to notice. "Her name's Elena," Callum said, "but she doesn't need to be found." The man, Nathan, smirked. Metal glinted at his sleeve as he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, wax seal still clinging to the worn fabric. "I've got a marriage license. Filed last year in Baker County. She left before the paperwork was finished. I'm here to bring my wife home." Elena didn't step back. But Callum saw her shift, instinctive like someone long trained to give way. "I never signed anything," she said. Her voice wasn't shaking, but it came rough. Nathan held the paper aloft, not offering it, just brandishing it like a stage prop. "Signatures don't always matter when no one bothers to treat you like a person. I had a stamp, 2 witnesses. Easy enough at a military outpost." Callum didn't turn to her. He just spoke, low and sure, like nailing a shutter against storm wind. "No one gets taken from here." Nathan let out a short laugh. "You think you've got the right to keep her?" Callum stepped down the porch steps, no weapon, no heat in his voice. Just a man standing between the wind and something he hadn't known would one day mean so much. "I'm not keeping her," he said. "I'm standing between her and the place she lost herself." Elena stepped forward to stand beside him. "I'm not going anywhere." Nathan's smile wavered. "I saved you once, remember?" Elena nodded. "I used to think that, but now I know. You only saved the parts you meant to keep." No one moved, but something tore loose in the wind. Nathan folded the paper, shoved it into his coat. "You know I could make noise about this." Callum didn't flinch. "We don't talk loud. Doesn't mean we don't hear each other." Nathan looked around. Small town, he knew. They'd hear, maybe stay quiet, but they'd remember. He turned, mounted his horse. "You choosing to live like a ghost? No church? No name?" Elena clenched her fists, but she didn't shout. She just said, barely above a whisper, I'm choosing not to be planted in soil where I can't grow." Nathan left. His horse kicked dust into the air. Neither of them watched him go. Only after the hoofbeats faded behind the ridge did Elena exhale, like waking from a dream that always ended the same way. Callum didn't touch her. He just went inside and brought out an old coat, laying it gently on the step near her. "If you're cold." She didn't take it, but she didn't refuse it either. Later, they sat together on the porch steps. No one spoke of what had happened. But Callum saw her lean her head lightly against her arm, eyes open, not hiding. She didn't need rescuing, but for the first time she let someone stay when she trembled. The next day was market day. The wind had teeth to it, but the sun came down steady, like it wouldn't allow excuses. Callum tied the horse behind the blacksmith's shop. Elena walked beside him, cradling a cloth bag with jars of jam to trade for thread and salt. Gray dress, low hood, same as always. But her steps didn't falter. She walked straight, shoulders level, didn't clutch the bag tight, didn't shrink into him. People stared, just like before. But this time the stares didn't pull her back. Then came the sound of hooves again, too loud for a market morning, and a man's voice, not raised but sharp as a blade. "I'm here to take my wife back. She's fled her duty. I have the papers. Who among you will stop me?" No reply at first. No clang of pots. No gasp. Just a silence that split the air like rotted wood giving way. Nathan Crowley stood in the center of the square, paper raised like it was scripture. His horse reared, restless, but he stayed still, posing like a monument to borrowed power. Elena froze for 2 seconds. Only 2. But in them, Callum saw her almost step toward him, not from belief, but from habit. The kind of habit that teaches a woman silence is safer than defiance. Callum touched her elbow, not to pull, not to hold, just to remind her. This time she wasn't alone. He walked forward into the open space, stopping 3 paces from Nathan. "That paper means nothing here," he said, "and she doesn't belong to anyone." Nathan laughed, not from humor, but disbelief that someone could say no to him twice. "She left out of turn. I've got dates, names, a commander's signature." Elena stepped up then, not because Callum led, but because she understood. If she didn't stand now, the lessons she'd learned about staying still would vanish. She stood beside him. The wind lifted her skirt's hem. She didn't fix it. "If you believe that paper's real," she said, clear, calm, firm, "then we'll go with you to the county courthouse. Let them see it. In front of a judge. In front of the law." A pause. The square held its breath. Clara Bennett, behind her vegetable stall, gripped a spool of thread. Mr. Moore, the blacksmith, gave a small nod, as if to say, "We're here." Nathan swallowed. The paper in his hand dipped half an inch. "No need to turn this into a scene," he muttered, stepping back like the ground had changed beneath him. Elena didn't step forward, but she didn't step back either. "No one's making a scene," she said. "We're just not staying quiet anymore." A woman's voice from the crowd, name unknown, called out, "She belongs here." "You don't." Nathan gripped the reins. His horse jerked. He mounted. "You think you've won?" Callum didn't reply, just turned to Elena. Their eyes spoke without words. Nathan rode out of the square. Dust swirled behind him. No one turned to watch. When silence returned, it wasn't a shield anymore. It was acknowledgement. Elena said nothing, but she stood there, in the very place that once made her fold inward. She didn't tremble. She breathed, deep, steady, like someone reclaiming the space that had been taken. Callum extended a hand, not to claim, just in case she wanted it. Elena looked at it, then placed her hand in his, not gripping, but not letting go. May arrived like a gentle exhale, unhurried, hushed. The frost had long melted, but the ground still held its dampness, like someone not yet ready to forgive. The wind softened. Scents of young roots, sap, and overturned soil mixed in the air, a green smell only those who'd known loss could truly treasure. Elena went out every morning, hood drawn low, hands on a small spade, knees pressed to the earth. She didn't hum, didn't speak. But the rhythm of her digging, steady, clean, certain, felt like someone rewriting an old story in a silent language only the hands could read. She planted potatoes in long rows, red onions in a crescent shape, and near the fence, where the earth rose slightly in a quiet swell, she placed a patch of unnamed yellow flowers. They weren't among the seeds Callum had bought. Not medicinal, not edible, not useful. But Elena planted them anyway, and every morning she bent to touch them with 3 fingertips, gently, as if too much pressure might crush hope before it dared bloom. Callum was rebuilding the chicken coop frame after a storm. He worked alone, didn't ask for help. But when he came back inside, there was always a water basin waiting by the door, a dry towel, and his gloves, stitched up with tight black thread, firm and sure, like someone who never left a task half done. He didn't ask about the yellow flowers. He didn't need to. But one late afternoon, when sunlight lit just one corner of the table, Callum set a small wooden box in front of her. No paint, no carvings, just smoothed pine with rusted brass hinges. Elena looked at the box. She didn't open it right away. "For next season," he said. "So it's not just food." She opened the lid. Inside were 3 small seed packets, tied with twine. Each label marked in blocky, masculine script, slightly unsure of itself. Lavender, goldenrod, wild rose. No one ever planted something beautiful for me. Elena didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like someone remembering a thought they'd once taught themselves not to want. She almost cried, but didn't. Her chest lifted one deep breath higher than usual. Her fingers gripped the edge of the box, not tight, just enough to say thank you without sound. Callum didn't touch her shoulder, didn't ask if she liked it. He just sat beside her. They didn't kiss, didn't speak any word that hinted at promise or claim. But when his hand rested atop hers, rough and dry like the soil they shared, and hers was small, cool, but steady, she didn't pull away. And sometime after, she gently curled her fingers, just slightly, not to hold, but to confirm. He didn't move. He let it stay that way. Long enough for the house to hear that something was sprouting, something without a name yet, but real. That evening, she marked 3 plots in the earth, one near the southern fence, one beside the flat stone where he used to split firewood, and one at the far edge of the garden near a stream that only she knew flowed beneath, soft where the soil gave. Lavender, goldenrod, wild rose. She didn't rush to plant, didn't scatter the seeds. But each stick she pressed into the ground, each line of string she tied taut, felt like a map laid out for something greater than harvest. By nightfall, the kitchen was as still as the sky after rain. Elena placed the wooden box high on the shelf, beside the tea tin and salt jar. Among all the things meant to keep a body alive, she set down something meant just to be beautiful, something no one had ever let her protect before. The fire still burned in the stove, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't step outside to latch the chicken coop door. Callum had already done it. Not because she needed the help, but because someone had started listening to her, not with words, but with hands. November arrived on the shoulders of cold air and a sky washed pale, like cloth steeped in ash water. The last oak leaf dropped from the tree outside just as Callum latched the stable door. In the air, there was the soft click of something closing, not abruptly, not loud, but like someone finishing a story they'd waited a lifetime to tell. They didn't speak much these days, but the house no longer felt empty. Every gesture had become a reply to questions that no longer needed asking. Elena made apple preserves, sealing the jars neatly, labeling each with her own careful handwriting. Callum cleared the porch roof, replaced the warped board on the bottom step, not to impress her, but so she wouldn't trip. On a Saturday morning, no one said a word, but both dressed early. Elena wore her ash-gray dress. The sleeve had been mended at the elbow. The fabric was plain. But when she stood under the porch light, the faint sun caught the hemline and made it shine just enough to remind you, what's kept doesn't need to sparkle to endure. Callum helped her onto the wagon. He didn't say let's go. She didn't ask why. Just the steady clop of hooves down the slope and the red dirt road leading into town. Ash Hollow was the size of a period at the end of a sentence. But the stairs there were always sharp enough to read between lines. People didn't just see who arrived. They remembered who'd been missing. They stepped into the general store. Callum first, Elena just behind. No hand-holding, no introductions. But she stood tall, didn't cling to him, and he stood close, didn't step in front. Clara Bennett, the shopkeeper, slid a spool of gray thread onto the counter. No names, no questions. For winter, she said. Patch the old places. Elena took it, nodded once. A woman by the shelf stilled her hands. An old man adjusted his cap. No one smiled, but no one turned their back either. As they left the store, a gust tugged at Elena's skirt. She held it with one hand. The other held tight to a sack of flour. On the ride home, Callum asked, his voice just louder than the crunch of the wheels over dry earth. Still feel like town's keeping its distance? Elena looked forward. Her cheeks were flushed, but not from cold. No, she said. I think they're just waiting to see if I really mean to stay. That afternoon, she opened the seed box, unwrapped each bundle, laying them out in a quiet order that needed no words. Lavender, goldenrod, wild rose, each set on a cloth square, neatly folded. Callum stood in the doorway. He didn't ask what she meant to do. Elena looked up. Her eyes didn't gleam, but they were steady. I don't know what spring will bring, she said, but I know I'll be here. Not because of debt, not for shelter, but because something in her had finally stopped running. That night, they sat by the fire. Nothing special on the table, just toasted bread, a bit of honey, and the kind of silence that had grown comfortable. Callum poured the tea, handed her a cup. Elena took it, letting her fingers brush his. She didn't pull away. A little later, she set the cup down, turned to him. The firelight reached up her face, caught her jaw, the tip of her nose, the place behind her eyes where she wasn't hiding anymore. And then they kissed. Not fast, not heated, not like people who just discovered one another, but like people who had shared a season and finally gave themselves permission to say, I've chosen to stay. The next morning, as Callum repaired the western fence line, Elena marked 3 planting spots. Near the flat stone, for lavender. By the kitchen window, for wild rose. Beside the chicken coop, where morning light landed first, for goldenrod. No one mentioned winter. No one said we'll wait for spring, but they had planted something that reached deeper than any root. If this story settled in your heart like dust on a windowsill, we'd be mighty grateful if you gave it a like, hit that subscribe button, and maybe left a comment telling us what it made you feel. Here at Wild West Love Echoes, we tell the kind of stories that don't shout. They stay quiet in your chest long after the tale ends. Every word you share helps us carry these echoes a little farther down the trail.